Chapter 28. Without warning, right in the middle of a step, Mara vanished. Mara? Luke thought desperately towards her, stretching out to the force. Mara! But there was no response. Somehow they must have gotten past her danger sense and combat skills and had launched a sudden and overwhelming attack. And she was unconscious. Or dead. No, he whispered aloud, his pulse pounding in his ears. Once again, a person he'd cared for. No, he bit out between clenched teeth, the agony in his heart swirling into something dark and deadly as the pain turned into a growing fury. Deal out casual death, would they? If death was what they wanted, he would show them just what death looked like. In his mind's eye, he saw himself striding down the spiral slideway, throwing the aliens aside like sand dolls, their bodies slamming against the unyielding black stone and dropping crumpled to the floor. His lightsaber would flash through their ranks, cutting through weapons and bodies and leaving more death in its wake. His lightsaber. He looked down at the lightsaber in his hand. Not the weapon he himself had made in the oppressive heat of the Tatooine desert, but the one his father had made so many years before. The weapon he had given to Mara. He took a deep breath, letting go of the rage and hatred, a cold shiver running through him as he realized the magnitude of what he had almost done. Once again, he had come to the very brink of giving in to the dark side, had nearly surrendered to hatred and the lust for revenge, and the overwhelming desire to use his power for his own selfish ends. If you honor what they fight for, Master Yoda's words echoed hauntingly through his mind. All right, he murmured aloud. No, he would not avenge whatever had happened to Mara, at least not for vengeance's sake, but he would seek out the truth of her fate. With an effort, he cleared the last lingering emotions from his thoughts, Mara's picture of songbirds singing inside an ore-crushing facility flickering once through his mind as he did so. Stretching out with the force, he focused his mental probe towards the spot where Mara's presence had vanished. Unless they had already taken it away, he should at least be able to sense her body. But there was nothing. Not Mara, not the humans or aliens she had supposedly been moving towards when she disappeared. In fact, within a certain area he could detect nothing at all, almost as if something was blocking his access to the Force. Abruptly, his breath went out of him in a rush, relief and chagrin flooding into him in equal quantities. Of course, the aliens had moved Ysalamiri into the space between him and Mara. Even given the four-floor distance between them, he should have immediately recognized what was happening. Once again, it seemed, he was having to relearn Yoda's warning against acting while in the grip of strong emotion. But there was no time for self-recrimination. Within the Ysalamiri effect, Mara's fledgling Jedi powers were useless, and it was up to him to get her out. He pulled out his comlink and thumbed it on. R2, he called softly. I need you down here. Take the non-moving spiral slideway behind the wall to the right of the hidden exit doorway and come down 4 floors. Splitter of stones, leave someone behind in the stairway to seal the door, and the rest of you come with R2. Got that? There was a twitter from the droid and a chirp from the Quam Jaw. Luke returned the comlink to his belt and walked slowly across the floor towards one of the level's back corners, stretching out beneath him with the force as he moved. He could sense beings on the next level down, but none of them seemed to be in this particular area. That could be misleading, given that he still didn't have a clear reading on this species, but he would have to risk it. Igniting Mara's lightsaber, the feel of the weapon bringing back a flood of old memories, he gripped it with both hands and dug the blue-white blade into the floor. His big fear had been that, like the cortosis ore in the cave below, the strange black stone would resist the lightsaber in some way. But though it felt rather like dragging a tree branch upstream through a rapidly flowing river, the blade sliced through the stone without trouble. Walking in a tight circle, beveling the edge inward so that the plug wouldn't fall through to the floor below, he carved out a round hole a little wider than R2. Finishing his cut, he confirmed one final time that no one seemed to be below him. Then, stretching out to the force, he lifted the stone plug out. It was heavy, far heavier than anything of such a small size had any business being. Maneuvering it off to the side, he set it down with its edge just overlapping the hole, then dropped flat to the floor and peered carefully down. The area did indeed appear to be deserted. Getting a grip on the rim, he eased himself in to hang full length through the hole. Bracing himself, drawing on the force to strengthen his muscles, he let go. The floor was about 4 meters down, a trivial fall for a Jedi. He let his legs collapse as he hit, absorbing the impact and dropping him into a hopefully unobtrusive heap as he stretched out his senses for any sign he'd been seen or heard. But there was nothing. Getting carefully to his feet, he looked around again. Master Walker of Sky? Luke looked up. Keeper of Promises was in the room above him, peering down through the hole in the floor. Keep quiet, he warned the Quamjaw. Where are the rest of your people? They are coming in a flanking curve, Keeper of Promises said. Some guard your machine. It is the slowest. Let me know when he gets there, Luke told him, stretching out with the force. There were, he could tell, more of the aliens on the next level down, but again, they didn't seem to be too close to him. Igniting the lightsaber again, he began cutting a new hole directly beneath the first one. He'd finished the hole and had dropped to the next floor down when a quiet whistle from above signaled R2's arrival. Great, Luke called softly, looking up at the blue and silver dome, peering cautiously over the lip 2 floors up as he pulled out his comlink and thumbed it on. The droid backed out of sight, and there was another acknowledging whistle from the comlink. All right, Luke said, glancing around. He'd come down into a deserted room this time, but through the open door he could see glimpses of moving shadows. You see the control boards over there? I want you to go find a computer jack you can access and plug into it. Try to get a floor plan of the fortress if you can. If you can't, just look around and see what else you can find. When I signal you again, unplug and get back over to the hole as fast as you can. Got all that? There was a slightly nervous-sounding twitter, and the comlink went dead. Gripping Mara's lightsaber, trying to get a feel for all the minds around and below him, Luke waited. When it happened all at once. Suddenly, virtually in unison, all the alien minds changed, their various tones and concerns and textures all shifting to focus in the same direction. Not with fear, concern, or even surprise, but with the calm, deadly purpose of professional soldiers. R2 had tripped the flags Mara had warned him about, and the fortress was most mobilizing for action. Luke crouched a little closer to the floor, acutely aware that everything now hinged on what exactly that action would consist of. If all the aliens merely settled in where they were and braced for possible attack, he would have no choice but to fight his way through them to get to Mara. If, however, they instead concentrated on the slideway ramps and the floor where the attempted break-in was occurring, and they did. Even as Luke held his breath, he could sense the aliens below moving purposefully towards the slideway Mara had taken earlier. If he was careful and quick, the path to her might just be open. Especially if he was quick. Igniting the lightsaber, he set to work carving yet another hole in the black stone. He had finished the opening and dropped through to the next level down when his probing senses picked up the cue he'd been waiting for. The subtle change in the alien minds as the assembled assault teams readied themselves. Now, R2, he called softly into the comlink. Send the Quamjaw to me down the hole, and get over there yourself. The droid acknowledged, and Luke stepped beneath the hole to wait. The Quamjaw weren't wasting any time. Already they were dropping through like leaves blown from a tree, folding their wings tightly as they passed through each successive hole, opening them up between floors to regain control of their flight. Through the flurry of falling Quamjaw, he spotted R2's dome lean cautiously over the edge, and caught an echo of the surprised and nervous twitter as the droid saw how much farther down Luke was now than the last time he'd looked. A twitter that turned into an electronic gasp as Luke reached out with the force to pick him up and drop him wheels first through the hole. Luke winced at the noise, but fortunately R2 quickly realized what was happening and quieted down before the sound of a descending electronic scream could give the whole thing away. Luke got the droid safely to the floor beside him, then stretched out again to the edge of the stone plug he'd left poking over the side of the first hole above. At this distance it felt even heavier, but with alien warriors presumably even now fanning out towards the command center, he had great motivation for speed. 3 seconds later, the plug was securely back in place. 15 seconds after that, working his way down, he had all the rest of the hole sealed as well. "Mara's one more level down," he told R2, and the huddled group of Quam Jaw, stretching out with the force. All the aliens below were gone, and there hadn't been any changes in the overall mental state that would indicate they'd tumbled to his trick. Though oddly enough, he could no longer sense the assault teams themselves. Equipped with Ysalamiri, perhaps? Probably. But for the moment, those groups were too far away to worry him. "Stay close to me," he said, igniting the lightsaber and starting his final cut. "We'll try to keep this as quiet as we can for as long as we can." "But if they discover us?" Child of Winds asked anxiously. Luke frowned at him in mild surprise. He hadn't realized that the young Quam Quay had come in with the Quam Jaw. In fact, he'd intended to give instructions that the child stay behind with whoever had sealed up the hidden door. Clearly, it had slipped his mind. Just as clearly, it was too late to do anything about it now. "If the alarm goes up, you're to split up and create confusion," Luke told the aliens. "Draw them as far away from me as you can, then find your own ways out of the fortress and head back home." "We will obey," Splitter of Stone said, fluttering his wings. "And try not to get hurt," Luke added, finishing the cut and lifting the stone disc out of the hole. "Child of Winds, you stay with R2 and me." He leaned down for a quick visual scan of the empty room below. "All right," he said, slipping his feet into the opening and bracing himself for another drop. "Let's go." From the hazy look he'd had of this floor before his contact with Mara had been cut off, it had seemed fairly well structured, with rooms and wide corridors instead of the random wall segments they'd encountered upstairs. Not exactly an ideal arrangement for quiet skulking, but for the first few minutes it seemed to work. Luke led the way cautiously towards the blank spot that marked the cluster of Ysalamiri, splitting his attention between the area around him and the various warrior groups assembled near the slideways. Only half a dozen of the aliens wandered near enough to pose potential problems, and he was able to get his party past them unseen using force-created noises and other distractions. The warriors on the command center level were clearly the methodical types, and as Luke neared the Salamiri, he began to think he might actually be able to burst in on Mara and her captors unannounced. Han might have been that lucky. Luke, unfortunately, was not. They had nearly reached their goal when the illusion abruptly crumbled. "They're onto us," he murmured. "Do they know where we are?" Flyer through spikes asked. "I don't know," Luke said, stretching out to the force and trying to decipher the sudden turmoil in the emotions of the aliens around him. There was no way to tell whether the assault team had discovered the hole he had cut or had simply found the level deserted and come to the logical conclusion. What he could tell was that whatever it was they had discovered, their consternation had spread rapidly to the rest of the group. Clearly, they had a superb communication system in here, which meant that Mara's captors almost certainly also knew he was loose in the fortress, which meant he was out of time. "I'm going in," he told the Quamjaw tightly, easing an eye around the end of the corridor. Just to the right, on the far side of a cross corridor, he could see an unmarked door. At the far end of that room, as near as he could tell, were the Salamiri. "R2, Child of Winds, come with me. The rest of you, scatter." "We obey, Walker of Sky," Builder with Stone said, and with a multiple flutter of wings, they were off. "Stay behind me," Luke warned the droid in Quam Quay, and with a quick glance down the corridor, he launched himself at the door, igniting Mara's lightsaber as he ran. He grabbed the release lever, twisting it and pushing the door open in a single motion, and leapt inside, only to find that he had miscalculated. The room he was in was long and dimly lit, with most of the left half filled with stacks of crates, and no sign of Mara. But a second glance showed he hadn't miscalculated as badly as he thought. Laid out side by side, a group of Ysalamiri on nutrient frames had been leaned against the back wall. R2 warbled questioningly. "She's in the next room over," Luke called over his shoulder as he raced towards the row of frames, a plan of action starting to take shape in his mind. Unless her interrogators were themselves force sensitive, they would have no way of knowing whether or not their protective barrier was still in place. If he could move enough of the Salamiri out of the way to give Mera access to the Force again, the two of them together should be able to turn the tables on her captors and get her out of there. Skidding to a halt in front of one of the frames in the middle of the wall, feeling the sudden disconcerting silence in his mind as he stepped inside the meter wide range of the creature's effect, he set the lightsaber down on the floor and lifted up the frame. Fortunately, given that there was no way for him to enhance his muscular strength this close to a Salamiri, the frame wasn't very heavy. He carried it a few steps away from the wall and propped it up against the nearest crate. Stepping back to the next one in line, he picked it up and crossed towards the first. With his Jedi senses blinded by the Salamiri effect, R2's sudden squawk was his only warning. He looked up, dropping the frame and leaping backwards, his hand instinctively stretching back towards the lightsaber on the floor. One of the blue-skinned aliens was crouching in a marksman stance in the open doorway, another of the nutrient frames strapped to his back, his weapon up and tracking. Luke took another step backward, the force suddenly flooding in around him again as he moved out of the Salamir's range. He felt the power tingling through his hand as he called the lightsaber to him, wondering why it wasn't already in his hand, and with a burst of understanding it belatedly hit him. He himself was clear of the Salamiri effect, but the lightsaber wasn't. The alien's weapon was lined up on him now. "Do not move," he ordered in accented basic, his tone making it clear he was serious. R2 started to roll cautiously toward him, the glowing red eyes flickering warningly towards the droid, and with a screech that was half challenge and half pure terror, Child of Winds dropped from the ceiling to land in full talon grip on the alien's gun arm. The weapon fired, a brilliant blue flash that went wide, slicing past Luke into one of the nutrient frames along the wall. Luke dived backward in the opposite direction towards the cover of the stacked crates, grabbing for his own lightsaber still hanging from his belt and yanking it clear. His momentum slammed him into one of the other frames, sending it crashing to the floor. And for one brief second, as he caromed off the wall and back towards the crates, he could feel Mera's presence again. The touch didn't last long, perhaps half a second before he bounced back into range of the two Ysalamiri he'd set down beside the crates. But it was long enough. He could sense that she was all right, felt her own flash of relief that he was similarly unharmed, caught a sense of humans and aliens lined up along the wall in front of her. He had time for a single emotional instruction: "Stall!" before the contact was cut off again. Digging his feet into the floor, he ignited his lightsaber and charged past the frames, wondering if he would make it through to the other side of the bubble before the alien got his aim back. It was a close thing, and for a painful heartbeat, he thought Child of Wind's act of bravery was going to cost the Quam Quay his life. Instead of trying to wrench his winged assailant off his right arm, the alien had merely slammed his left hand into Child of Wind's throat in an attempt to stun him, then transferred his gun to that hand. For an instant, his first inclination seemed to be to use the weapon to kill the sharp-taloned nuisance clinging to him, but as he caught sight of Luke charging toward him with drawn lightsaber, he shifted his aim to the more threatening target and fired. But he was too late. Luke was past the last of the Ysalamiri now, and with access to the Force again, there was no way a single gunman could penetrate his defenses. He sprinted forward, anticipating and sweeping his lightsaber across each of the alien's shots with practiced ease. Still firing, the alien dodged to the right, crossing behind R2. Luke switched direction to match his opponent, wondering if the alien was planning to duck down and use the droid as a shield. If so, he never got the chance. From midway down R2's body came the flash of an arc current, and with an abrupt jolt of twitching leg muscles, the alien stumbled off balance and fell heavily sideways to the floor, taking Child of Winds down with him. Luke leapt over R2, landing with one foot on the gun and feeling the sudden blindness again as he came within range of the Ysalamir backpack. The alien's glowing red eyes gazed up with an unreadable expression as Luke raised his lightsaber high and brought it sweeping down, seeing his own death arcing down towards him. And then, midway through his slash, Luke closed down the blade and instead of decapitating the alien, merely slammed the heavy metal of the handle across the back of his head. Without a sound, he collapsed limply to the floor, unconscious. "You all right?" Luke asked Child of Winds, helping pry the other's clenched feet off the gunman's arm. The points where the Quamquay's claws had been, he noticed, were oozing with slowly growing spots of red. I am unhurt, Child of Wind said shakily. Why did you protect his life? Because there was no need to kill him, Luke answered, looking up at R2. The droid seemed a little shaky too, but game as always as he retracted his arc welder back into its compartment. Thanks for the assist, both of you. Come on, Mara needs us. Running back to the wall, he began grabbing the nutrient frames and hurling them away behind him, all thoughts of subtlety replaced now by a desperate need for speed. That quick kaleidoscopic glimpse that he'd had into Mara's mind had included the threat of drawn weapons. He threw 3 of the nutrient frames aside, risked taking the time to get rid of the one next to where Mara's lightsaber still lay on the floor, then stepped close to the wall, and realized with a surge of fear that he had cut it a little too close. Filtered through the emotional haze and clipped tactical thinking roiling together in Mara's mind, he could sense an indistinct, wavering image of the 4 aliens with their weapons pointed at her. Touching his forehead to the wall, he ran through his sensory enhancements. Skywalker put me into the trance, he heard her voice faintly through the thick stone. And he's not here. I could die of shock or bleed to death. You'll do neither, another voice said. I know both the power and limitations of Chiss weaponry. Think of it as an added incentive for Skywalker to surrender to us. Luke didn't wait any longer. Straightening up, he drew back his lightsaber, stretching out to the Force as he pointed the tip of the glowing green blade at the wall, agonizingly aware that he would have only one shot at this. But if the Force could guide him with the pinpoint precision necessary to block blaster bolts. And then, with a clarity that was startling in its unexpectedness, an image sprang into his mind. An alien standing with his back towards Luke, almost in front of him, raising a weapon towards Mara. Setting his teeth, Luke thrust his lightsaber through the wall to slash the green blade into the upper part of the alien's weapon. And on the far side of that wall, he sensed the neatly arranged little scene dissolve into chaos. Luke pulled the lightsaber downward, slicing an opening for himself as quickly as the stubborn black stone would permit, the emotional turmoil of sudden combat flooding over him as Mara exploded into action. He sensed a dizzying spin as she spun around and dropped into a crouch behind her chair, stretching out with the force for her enemy's weapons. She yanked one straight out of its owner's hand, twisted another to the side to send his shot harmlessly into the ceiling, ducked back as another shot splattered across the corner of her chair back, sending tiny agonizing drops of liquid metal grazing across her cheek. And then Luke's section of wall collapsed with a thud into the chaos. He caught Mara's eye as she crouched behind the chair and threw his lightsaber to her, stretched out with the force to snatch hers from the floor behind him. And with the old weapon flashing memories of Tatooine and Hoth and Bespin through his mind, he strode into the midst of the fight, the blue-white blade splattering bolts of enemy fire and shattering across the weapons themselves. One of the aliens leapt at him, a knife flashing into his hand. Luke grabbed him bodily with the force and slammed him back against 2 others preparing for the same maneuver. Stop! An authoritative voice ordered. The aliens froze in their tracks, their eyes focused unblinkingly on Luke. Luke eyed them warily in return, his lightsaber held at the ready. Out of the corner of his eye, he got a glimpse of the speaker, a gray-haired man wearing an Imperial Admiral's uniform. There's no point in anyone throwing their lives away here, the Admiral said sternly. Let them go. Luke stretched out towards him with the force, trying to gauge his sincerity. But both he and the other Imperial in the room were still being shielded by the remaining Ysalamiri behind the sidewall. Mara? Luke asked, risking a quick glance at her. What do you think? She said, with a snort as she came to his side. The green blade of his lightsaber held crosswise at the ready between her and the aliens. He's trying to save his own neck. Of course I am, the Admiral conceded, without embarrassment. As I'm also attempting to protect the necks of my troops. If there was one thing Thrawn made certain his officers clearly understood, it was never to waste people for no reason. He smiled. And it is well known that the Jedi Master Luke Skywalker does not kill needlessly or in cold blood. He's also stalling, Mara added. They're probably setting up some kind of trap right now. Then we'd better get moving, Luke nodded at the group. You think we should take one of them as a hostage? Mara hissed between her teeth. No, she said. Park is too old. He'd slow us down, and I don't trust any of these chists not to be more trouble than they're worth. That goes double for General Fell. Luke blinked, focusing his attention for the first time on the younger Imperial's face. Baron Fell? Yes, it's me, Luke, Fell confirmed. It's been a long time. Yes, it has, Luke murmured. Baron Fell, working for the Empire again? Mara nudged him in his side. Let's save the Rogues Veterans Reunion for another time, okay? We've got to get moving. Right, Luke said, stepping back towards the wall in the opening he'd cut. Do think about our offer, Mara, the Admiral called after him. I think you'll find our struggle out here to be the most vitally important challenge you could ever face. And you think about my warning, Mara countered. Stay away from Bastion. The Admiral shook his head minutely. We'll do what we have to. Then so will I, Mara threatened. Don't say I didn't warn you. Fell smiled at her. Take your best shot. Perhaps your fear of what the Empire might do with our information will be an added motivation for you to join us, Park added. At any rate, I'm certain we'll see you again. Right, Mara said. I'll look forward to it. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.